I'm just going to introduce you to Tim Riley, who's going to give you a very quick update on America's National Churchill Museum. Tim.
Well, thank you, Scott, and thank you all for the time here this afternoon to talk about America's National Churchill Museum at Westminster College in Fulton. It's been a year since this conference gathered in Missouri in Kansas City at the National World War I Museum and, of course, at the Churchill Museum at Westminster College. And what I thought I'd do today, because we experienced, those of you who attended the conference last year, experienced some of the great programming we present at the museum, talk a little bit about another part of our mission and purpose, that is the collections aspect of the Churchill world. America's National Churchill Museum is a terrific depository for over 10,000 objects. We were made and designated by the U.S. Congress as the nation's Churchill Museum. We take that moniker very, very seriously, and we're very privileged to be custodians of objects. In recent months, we have received quite a few new collections, and I'd like to share one or two of those with you in the brief time we have here this afternoon, one of which I think is appropriate to announce here in Edinburgh, because we recently acquired, in June of this year, a terrific Churchill painting from the mid-1920s entitled The Firth of Forth. And I think it's quite extraordinary to be able to show this on the big screen here in Edinburgh, really literally a half a mile or so from where it was painted. This painting was done by Winston Churchill here in the mid-1920s, and as the theme today seems to suggest, we are talking about the Royal Navy, and as Captain Hendricks shared with us earlier today, this painting, I think, is very appropriate to what he was talking about. Depicted in this Churchill painting are some Acasta-class warships, the same category of warships that Churchill helped to commission and modernize in the First World War when he made the fleet ready before the First World War. This painting is done in 1925, almost in a melancholic way. They're steaming back to port, about to be decommissioned. So Churchill is, I think, maybe waxing nostalgia here with this painting. The painting is included in a newly installed exhibition galleries at the Churchill Museum called our Passion for Painting Galleries. We've reinstalled this gallery to include not only the new painting, but also two loans to the Churchill Museum, two paintings that are quite extraordinary, one of which I'd like to share with you today. It's the one depicted in the logo slide here. For many, many years, this painting was entitled Distant View of Venice. In fact, today, the official title in the Churchill records is Distant View of Venice. And if you look here closely, you see the sun setting over this tremendous city with palm trees on the left. But if you look closer, and for those of you who have been to Venice, you may not recognize San Marco. You may not see any canals. This is, I think, a misattribution and probably just a wrong title. But for many, many years, this was exhibited as View of Venice. Recent research has shown that it is actually a North American painting. Many of you know Paul Rafferty's work. His name has come up. Paul Rafferty discovered this at first, and I was down in Miami Beach a few months ago and confirmed it with this photograph. If you take a close look at the skyline, it is in fact a view of Miami from Miami Beach. Now, why is this significant and why is it appropriate that we have it at America's National Churchill Museum at Fulton? Well, because this was painted in 1946 in the weeks before Winston Churchill, together with President Truman, came to Westminster College. So as he's envisioning an iron curtain descending across the continent, he's looking at the view of a sunset on Miami. So it's a really remarkable painting. We're very, very honored to have this and several other paintings on loan from a private collection in the States on long-term loan. And collecting and exhibitions is a big part of what we do. And this kind of detective work is great fun to share with folks. We will be submitting the paperwork and the photographic evidence to the Churchill Archives, Alan, and others to make sure that hopefully we can petition to have the name changed once and for all and set the record straight. Another brief update on the largest work of our collection. The largest work in the collection, I like to say, is the Wren Church of St. Mary Aldermanbury, famously located from central London to the middle of Missouri and reinstalled on the Westminster College campus in the 1960s as a tribute to Churchill and his Iron Curtain speech at Westminster College. The church has now been almost 55 years in Fulton, and it is in desperate need of some continued preservation and work. We began that in earnest a few years ago. We invested $2 million into the facade, and I'm very pleased to announce that beginning in the new year, we're poised and ready and funded to invest another $4 million into the preservation of this great, great treasure to make sure that the museum... Thank you. And thank many of you who helped make this happen. These things are not cheap, but investments worth making to make sure that this terrific legacy remains a popular spot for North American and indeed world visitors throughout. Because of that, for those of you who are contemplating a trip to Westminster College and the museum in the new year, I encourage you to come. We will be open, but I may have to give you a hard hat to go into some of the galleries. Pardon our dust signs will be displayed throughout, I'm sure. And finally, one other bit of item and news I'd like to share with you is an invitation. Next year, as we'll soon learn from Sir David, is the 150th anniversary of Churchill's birth, the sesquicentennial, in 2024. We have a number of programs planned at the museum, despite the construction, but we also have a very special event honoring one of our Churchill Fellows of Westminster College, a former board member of ICS US, and a terrific gentleman named Bill Rohde. Some of you may know Bill. He was a West Point graduate, served valiantly in combat in the Vietnam War, went on to command nuclear missile silos in NATO before assuming a wildly popular and successful career as the CEO of MTV International. He likes to say that he went from the Iron Curtain to the red carpet. And he did. And we're having an event honoring Bill with the Churchill Leadership Medal Award at the Guildhall in London. Next June. And I'd like to introduce you to Bill a little bit and invite you all to come to that event in June. So here's Bill in his own words.
How do we make a donation?
I'll let you know. The question was, how do you make a donation? See me afterwards.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent.
You have to be audacious, in my view, to set the goal very high. My tradition is to set the goal as high as possible. It's not about getting knocked down, it's about what you do after you get knocked down. And Churchill, of course, was the ultimate in resilience as well. It's impossible to predict the future. It really is. But you can get trends and you can get a bit of a hint by going back in history and learning from other people's mistakes or even your own mistakes.
An iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe.
And that Iron Curtain that Churchill so emphatically illustrated in his speech became the seeds that the Cold War became for the next 40 years. And the Berlin Wall was very symbolic. It's a symbol of division, of course, and it's coming down as a symbol of unity. West Point taught me, first and foremost, discipline. And discipline, in my view, is the key to everything, executing everything. I saw in my life direct involvement with the Iron Curtain, going to the red carpet, and then in my third career of global health, going into microbes. The Churchill Museum. I don't know of any place in the world that has brought this impressive array of leaders to one location. Leadership in today's world is not so much about one person, because we live in such a non-bipolar world now. 3 words: I'm not worthy. And certainly when it comes to Churchill, there is no way I would ever compare myself to Winston Churchill. But he is an inspiration, clearly.
The high roads of the future will be clear, not only for us, but for all. Not only for our time, but for a century to come.
So I hope that gives you a taste of this remarkable man and a good friend of ICS and the Churchill Museum, Bill Rohde. We will be gathering at the Guildhall in London, which was located across the street from where the Wren Church once stood and was bombed on the same night in the Blitz. Randolph will be there, Andrew Roberts will be there. Do mark your calendars. We'd love to have you with us on that day. So, but don't wait till then. Come to see us at America's National Churchill Museum at any time. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Tim. Tim and I did have a look last night over some champagne at that picture of the Firth of Forth to see if we could pinpoint in the modern landscape where it was taken, but it's definitely not Miami Beach, that one. It's definitely genuine. We still don't know where it was painted, though. Anyway, looking forward again, and Tim has alluded to this, 2024 is going to be an exceptional year for the Society, of course, 150 years since Churchill's birth. And I would like to welcome a great friend of the International Churchill Society, Sir David Cannadine, to come up and say some more about that. Sir David graciously chaired the 2015 committee for the 50th anniversary of Churchill's death. And that was a huge success. And he's taken on the task of 2024, chairing the committee again, bringing together all the Churchill organisations to bring 2024 to life next year. So David, I think, assisted by Alan Packwood, is going to come up and give us a bit of a rundown on what we can expect next year.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, it's a huge delight, as always, to be at this conference, and I'm so glad that my confusion between Venice and Miami Beach has now been definitively cleared up, and I'm sure that others of you here must be also glad to be clarified on this. I'm not going to say much because Alan is the serious person here and has lots of information which I hope will be of relevance and interest. As has been mentioned, in 2015 we marked the 50th anniversary of Churchill's death. And a series of events took place at Blenheim, at the Churchill Archives, at the Churchill War Rooms, at Chartwell, and so on, supported, of course, and involving the International Churchill Society. And I shall never forget, as I'm sure other of us won't, journeying up the Thames, tracing, as it were, the final journey that Churchill made on the vessel Haven Gore from Tower Pier to Waterloo. It's, of course, claimed that Churchill deliberately wanted his funeral train to go from Waterloo Station because he was sure that General de Gaulle would be one of the mourners. Anyway, that's no doubt, like many good Churchill stories, probably apocryphal. What I just briefly want to say before we get to the detail of the matter with Alan is, I suppose, to make the point that in between 2015 and what's coming up in 2024, things have in some ways moved on. Churchill is always news. He's news as almost as much in death as he was in life, but the sort of news has perhaps changed a bit. The death of Queen Elizabeth II marked the final severance, I think, of a major public figure who connected the present, as it were, to the Second World War and to Churchill's finest hour. Put another way, that means Churchill is moving from memory to history, and some of the history that's coming out some people don't like. Churchill was controversial for most of his life, and he's still controversial now. What does Churchill for our own times now look like? Well, if you want a simple answer to that, the first answer is actually to read Alan Packwood's brilliant edited book, The Cambridge Companion to Winston Churchill, which really is the most up-to-date account of the work that's been done on Churchill by a whole range of scholars working in different aspects of Churchill's life. And it's a terrific account of what the general views on Churchill are now. I gather all the copies that were on sale here have been sold. So if you want to read it, you'll have to order it through Amazon. Anyway, Churchill in our own time is, I think, a slightly different figure from Churchill as he was in 2015. And appropriately, I think, the arrangements for 2024 will be slightly different from those in 2015, I think in a good and interesting way. And so I'm now going to ask Alan to talk in more detail about that. Alan.
Okay, well, thank you very much, David, and thank you for the wonderful way in which you both chaired the 2015 committee and are now chairing the 2024 committee. Just to give some background to those of you who don't know what this committee is, we call it the Churchill Alliance Group. That's our informal name for it. And what we've tried to do is to bring together the various related Churchill organisations. So the International Churchill Society, but Chartwell, Blenheim, the Churchill Archive Centre, Paul Roger Champagne, who are so consistently generous to all Churchill causes, including to this conference. I think we should give them a round of applause, actually. The Churchill Fellowship Organisation, and this has started in the UK, and we're now widening it out to include organisations from elsewhere around the world. But we already have quite a lot of activity planned for 2024. And I'm just going to sort of whet your appetites this afternoon and give you some sort of tantalising glimpses. More information will be coming out very, very soon. But we know that the year is going to kick off at Chartwell, where Chartwell are going to do a display of Churchill's birthday cakes. He had the most amazing range of birthday cakes that would be specially made for him. So we'll start with that, and then Chartwell, I think, are going to have a whole programme of activity during the year relating to the theme of birthdays. They're also going to be refreshing some of their museum spaces. Blenheim are going to be launching a fashion exhibition, which is going to have a very strong Churchill component and will be linked to related programming during the year. And you saw Kate from the Imperial War Museum earlier on. She is curating an exhibition on Churchill and cartoons, which will launch at the main Imperial War Museum site in London in November of next year to coincide with the birthday. Next year is also the 40th anniversary of the Churchill War Rooms, so further announcements will follow about what is being done to celebrate that. The Churchill Archive Centre is going to be releasing some new Churchill materials. These are materials that came into us after the sad death of the official biographer, Sir Martin Gilbert, and which we have been busy cataloguing and digitising, but a further 26 boxes of Churchill material, including some real treasures. And we haven't gone public with any of this yet, but I'll just give you a taste of it today. They do include the notes for Churchill's very first political speech at Bath in 1897. And they also include a further draft of the Iron Curtain speech. So I was talking to Tim about how, because they have a draft of that speech at Fulton, Missouri. We have Churchill's final speaking notes in the Archive Centre, and we really need to get all of these drafts together and so that we can follow the whole creative process of that speech all the way through. The role that the International Churchill Society will be playing in all of this is very much as the key coordinator and facilitator, the hub that makes all of this possible. We want to use the International Churchill Society website as the vehicle for actually disseminating information about all of this activity and cross-promoting that. And David and I are going to be talking to John David Olson, who's here, and Andy Smith and others, and Justin, about how we get that set up and get that set up quite quickly. The other thing that I wanted to say is, of course, that we're not necessarily aware of all of the activity that's taking place. And it's been really interesting and exciting to hear during today about some of the other plans that are being made out there. So if you are involved in a Churchill Society or a related organisation and you're organising an event, you can be part of the Churchill Alliance. You just need to give us the information. So please do reach out and we'll ensure that you're coordinated and we can sort of cross-promote your event. And the focal piece of all of this, of course, will be next year's International Churchill Society Conference, which will be taking place in London. The dates haven't been absolutely finalised yet, but I've been authorised to say hold the last 2 weeks of September. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Sir David. Now, at recent conferences, we've all been blessed by the presence of Churchill's own, the Queen's own Royal Hussars, who are present here today. They're all along the back row, hiding in the dark. And we want to sort of say a few things. There's a few things that always amused me about Churchill's stories in the Hussars. Obviously, he was commissioned, gained his commission from Queen Victoria in 1895 into the 4th Hussars, and he remained colonel of the regiment in its various guises all the way through until his death in 1965. And as part of that, he was described as the greatest Hussar. And it always strikes me when I look at the numbers, when he said he was commissioned at 20 years old, a newly minted second lieutenant. His pay was £120 a year, and he calculated the cost of the necessary equipment to be £653, not including the £200 charger that his grandparents had given him as a gift. In other words, it cost him more to buy his uniforms, horses, and equipment than he earned in the first 5 years of being an army officer. So I'm keen to know whether things have changed slightly or whether it's still exactly the same. But what I would like to do is, they're here by the gracious gift of Ron and Eleanor Luke, who support us graciously every year. So I would like to invite Ron Luke to come down and introduce the Hussars.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be able to do this. We thought that establishing, reinforcing, strengthening this tie between the ICS and the Queen's own Royal Hussars was in everybody's interest. And we have been very glad, this being the 3rd year, that a number of the junior officers and their commanding officer have been able to attend the conferences, the first in London, the second in Kansas City, and of course this one. And we hope to be able to continue that tradition going forward into the future. No good idea is entirely original, And Eleanor and I are also active with the Theodore Roosevelt Association, and they have a long-standing tie with the Theodore Roosevelt Carrier. In fact, I was talking about Captain Hendricks, and he is also a member. And so that's where we got the idea of tying the active military unit to the association or society. Now, the TR folks take us for a ride every few years on the Carrier, and I'm still looking for the invitation to go on one of the tank rides, but maybe that will come in the future. In any event, I want to introduce Captain Nelson Bacon. He is commissioned in 2019 from Sandhurst. He has commanded a tank platoon or section and is currently the commander of the forward reconnaissance platoon for the regiment. He has had multiple deployments to Estonia, and I think has a very interesting talk for you today on some of the activities of the regiment and also on some of the challenges that they face going forward. So, Captain.
Ron, thank you very much for that introduction. Ladies and gents, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. As Ron said, I'm from a group of 6 officers that have come down from the Queen's Royal Hussars, the successive regiment to Churchill's regiment, the 4th Queen's Own Hussars. I'm a little bit nervous because there's been quite a few very experienced, intelligent people who know a lot about Churchill speaking today, and I am not one of them. However, my boss is taking notes while trying to stay awake in the back row for my annual appraisal. So if you'd be kind enough to laugh at all the right points, you're getting the idea, and tell him how great it was, that would be much appreciated. Cool, so what I'm going to do is just give you a brief canter. In fact, Justin said I'm on a tight time schedule, so a gallop through the history of the regiment, in particular the 4th Queen's Own Hussars, and hopefully flavour it a little bit with some of the history of the great man himself, and then also some of the roles and activities of the regiment today. So I'll just begin with the regimental family. So the Queen's Royal Hussars, or sometimes as we're known, the Queen's Own and Royal Irish Hussars, began life as 4 separate regiments, raised as early as 1685. And these are the 4th Queen's Own in 1685, Churchill's regiment, the 3rd King's Own Hussars in 1685, the 7th Queen's Own Hussars in 1689, and then the 8th King's Royal Irish Hussars in 1695. For reference, the Coldstream Guards are the oldest continuously serving regiment in the British Army, and they were raised in just 1650, so 35 years before the 4th Queen's Own Hussars, give or take. I'm on a tight time schedule, so I'll skip that next bit because it's not that interesting. Right, so on to the 4th Queen's Own Hussars. So the regiment was first raised by the Honourable John Berkeley as the Princess Anne of Denmark's own regiment of dragoons in 1685. And that was in response to the Monmouth Rebellion, and they were ranked as the 4th Dragoons. And you can see the uniform, the fellow in the top right-hand corner, is the uniform of dragoons, or light dragoons, as it was then, distinctly different with the shako hat and the large plume and the sort of conical shape, which was typical of the dragoons. The dragoons were a skirmishing and reconnaissance cavalry. The Hussars were also at this time skirmishing and reconnaissance, but the distinct difference is dragoons operated dismounted as well as mounted and often carried firearms, whereas the Hussars were purely mounted and fighting with the sabre. So in the Crimean War, they took part in the famous Charge of the Light Brigade at the Alma in 1854, losing 4 officers and 55 men in the debacle. And Private Samuel Parks was awarded the Victoria Cross during the charge for saving the life of a trumpeter, Hugh Crawford. And we still have today the hoof of a trooper's horse, which sits in the mess anteroom in sort of commemoration of that battle. So a lot of regimental history very close to our hearts. They fought in the Battle of Salamanca in the Peninsular War, after which they plundered a good deal of Joseph Bonaparte's silver, much of which is still held in the mess today. And it's a job it's a job of the junior officers to go around and account for that silver on a daily basis. And notably, the Salamanca donkey, as we call it, was a salt and pepper holder from his baggage train, which again lives in the mess. They didn't then become the 4th Queen's Own Hussars until 1861, so quite a late transition. And Winston Churchill then commissioned into the regiment as a cornet in the 4th Hussars in February 1895, after which they were stationed in India. A cornet at the time was the equivalent of a second lieutenant, and the QRH, along with the Blues and Royals of the Household Cavalry, are the only 2 cavalry regiments to maintain that rank, the rest having switched across to the second lieutenant in that sort of homogeny. You can see the change in the uniform. Churchill's wearing the Hussars uniform with the distinctive Busby hat held in his hand, a sort of furry hat with a much straighter plume, and the heavily braided, very smart tunic, and also the really smart boots with the gold braid at the top. Interestingly, he's carrying the 1853 pattern light cavalry sabre, which is distinctly different to the 1908 pattern sword carried by soldiers and officers today on parade. And the sword he's carrying is much more akin to what the Royal Artillery would actually carry today. The renaming of dragoons to hussars, it may reflect, as I said, a slight change in tactics to sort of more mounted presence on the battlefield, but a lot of historians would argue that it's actually more closely linked to what was fashionable at the time and the move towards the hussars uniform and what was sort of fashionable in society around the 18th, 19th century. So later on in the regiment's history, in the First World War, the regiment was present at the First Battle of Ypres in October 1914, and the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915. And they also helped halt the German advance at the Battle of Morro Wood in March 1918. So a pretty significant presence in the First World War. In the Second World War, the regiment was much more primarily involved in the Greek campaign, where unfortunately, as a rearguard in the Corinth Canal bridge action, the regiment was entirely overrun and surrendered en masse, losing all senior officers and over 400 men as prisoners of war. It was, however, later reconstituted and for a time amalgamated with the 8th King's Royal Irish Hussars to put in a much better performance at the Second Battle of El Alamein, where it formed part of the 2nd New Zealand Division, leading the armoured thrust through the German lines and earning the honour of the Fernleaf from the New Zealanders, which all of our tank commanders still wear on their uniform today. Cool, so that is a brief history of Churchill's regiment from sort of it being raised all the way through to amalgamation. I'm now going to just sort of run you through Churchill, his very early military career, previous to a lot of the stuff that we've touched on today. So it's no secret, really, that in the early years, Sir Winston was not perhaps a disappointment to his father, the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the leader of the House of Commons. But having shown little promise as an academic at Harrow, he at least was not showing the early signs of the great man that he then turned into. His dislike for school was evident, but he had a penchant for all things military from a very early age. And having completed a crammer in order to pass the exams for Sandhurst, he was actually a non-graduate. He then thrived at Sandhurst, and in his own words, he says, "At Sandhurst, I had a new start. I was no longer handicapped by past neglect for Latin, French, or mathematics. We had now to learn fresh things, and we all started equal. Tactics, fortification, topography, military law, and military administration formed the whole curriculum. In addition were drill, gymnastics, and riding. No one need play any games unless he wanted to. Discipline was strict, and the hours of study and parade were long. One was tired at the end of the day." And I think those are words which anyone who's done the commissioning course at Sandhurst can definitely sort of resonate with. Maybe not the gymnastics, I didn't do much of that, but certainly little has changed, I would imagine. He also showed some signs of joining the cavalry very early on and recounted his love of horses in this sort of most humorous quote where he says, "Horses were the greatest pleasure at Sandhurst, and the group in which I moved spent all our money on hiring horses from the very excellent local livery stables. We ran up bills on the strength of our future commissions. We organised point-to-points and even a steeplechase in the park of a friendly grandee. and bucketed gaily about the countryside. And here I say to parents, especially to wealthy parents, don't give your son money. As far as you can afford it, give him horses. No one ever came to grief, except honourable grief, through riding horses. No hour of life is lost that is spent in the saddle. Young men have often been ruined through owning horses or through backing horses, but never through riding them. Unless, of course, they break their necks, which, taken at a gallop, is a very good death to die. Obviously a character at Sandhurst, and you can see him there engaging in some of the sort of less formal parts of the commissioning course. Okay, we've got to kick on. So having performed very well, finishing 8th out of 150 on his commissioning course, he commissioned as a cornet into the 4th Queen's Own Hussars in December 1895. His father was a little disappointed because at the time it was far more of an accolade to be an infantry officer. Okay, much has changed since, I can tell you, and now being a cavalry officer is definitely the most prestigious position you can be in. Not. Initially stationed at Aldershot, Churchill was enamoured with the military life from the off, and he said there is a thrill and charm of its own in the glittering jingle of cavalry squadrons manoeuvring at the trot, and this deepens into joyous excitement when the same evolutions are performed at the gallop. I think if you ask many of the junior officers today, as they first get to regiment, you'd get a very similar feeling from them. With armoured tactics, although sort of the jingling of armour might be replaced with the rumble of engines and the smell of diesel. But again, sort of things have changed, but they're much the same. He then went off to Cuba, as I'm sure many of you know, on a bit of adventure, and returned to the 4th Hussars and departed for India. When he was in India, they lived in bungalows, all the junior officers together, and I can only imagine what a riot that would have been. And if you read his writing about his life there wasn't an awful lot of work done. And he says, freed from the mundane cares, devoted ourselves to the serious purpose of life. And this was expressed in one word, polo. And that's a pastime that is still enjoyed by many cavalry officers today, although we have broadened our sort of our activities slightly. He did, however, sort of not get bored of polo, but find that it wasn't enough for him. And he says, the desire for learning came upon me. From November to May, I read 4 or 5 hours a day, every day, history and philosophy. What can we take from that? This is obviously the point where he diverges from the languid cavalry officer, like the rest of us, and starts to develop into the great man. So, note to self, less polo, more books. Okay, so the next couple of slides are a little bit of the history we've got from Churchill still living in the mess. A lot of them are in the comments book. And I think if anyone's read Sonia's book, you get the feeling he wasn't the easiest individual to live with. And a lot of these comments are really quite entertaining. So he says the general furnishings of the mess, being much below the standard of all other cavalry and most infantry regiments in the army, suggested that fresh furniture be purchased, the carpets be exported, that the wallpapers be altered, and that the mess be generally rendered more suitable to the dignity of the regiment. And off to the side, you've got someone else who's come in and written with what, where we're getting the money, and then at the bottom, in the opinion of, just before his signature, I think that's on the next slide actually, so in the opinion of WSC Churchill. The next one, yeah, again, moaning about the carpets again, but lovely bits of history. Then as we go on, this is Churchill's caricature, which he had done, and that hangs in the card room in the mess. And then a portrait of him as the colonel of the 4th Queen's Own Hussars, which still lives in the anteroom. And then again, another complaint. This time, the Irish stew should be more watery, not so rich or thick, and some mince. And then you've got there someone who's commented in the opinion of next to the comment. So, again, I heard Sonia talking to the poll guys last night about his exacting standards, and he always demanded the best. Well, you can see there that absolutely. And then the final quote we've got there, I've got to wrap up in a few minutes. My personal favourite, eggs on toast. So to prevent the toast all getting sodden, the eggs should first be put on a piece of stale toast. This absorbs the moisture, then transferred to a fresh piece of toast and served. If this method be adopted, it will have the hitherto, I think that word says improvements, on the subject of eggs on toast. So, yeah, very demanding standards. Fantastic. So, coming to the end, the regiment today, Churchill's regiment today. So today, the Queen's Royal Hussars are one of 3 heavy armoured Type 58 regiments, the others being the King's Royal Hussars and the Royal Tank Regiment. And together we crew the British Army's Challenger 2. It's a 75-ton main battle tank with a top speed of 60 kilometres an hour and 120mm rifled main armament capable of engaging armour up to 5 kilometres away. Our soldiers are the tactical and technical experts in mounted ground close combat. We're comprised of 4 Sabre squadrons, so those are fighting tank squadrons of 4 troops of 3 tanks. The 4th troop in the sort of army refined is crewed by the reserves, the Royal Wessex Yeomanry, and we would only see them on operations. And then 2 squadron headquarters tanks, the officer commanding and the second in commands. So 14 tanks in a squadron, 58 tanks in the regiment, including the commanding officer's tank and the second in command's tank. Alongside these Sabre squadrons, we've got headquarters squadron comprising a command troop, which services the battle group headquarters with command posts, and then reconnaissance troop, which is 8 light tanks conducting recce in front of the main fighting force. And then we've got the augmentation to that, so the quartermaster's department, the light aid detachment, doing all the sort of maintenance and things that keep the beast, which is a battle group, moving on the battlefield. The modern regiment has been involved in every major conflict of the past 30 years. So Op Granby, which to the Americans would be Desert Storm in Iraq, being the first British unit to cross the border into Kuwait and subsequently reach the Basra Road. Op Telek, or the Second Desert Storm, and subsequent Iraq campaign, and fighting in their primary role on tanks as well as dismounted and on snatched Land Rovers. Op Herrick in Afghanistan, and then today we're heavily involved with an ongoing commitment to Op Kabrit in Estonia, which is a NATO-enhanced forward presence in the Baltics, deterring any Russian aggression into those NATO territories. We've just returned from a tour of Op Kabrit, and we'll continue to have a squadron deployed there until September 2024. And alongside that, we've done all sorts of things such as COVID testing, vaccinating, illegal migrant handling down in Dover, support to civilian authorities, as well as ceremonial duties such as at the burial of Her late Majesty the Queen Elizabeth and His Majesty the King's coronation. So as you can see, the regiment today is modernised, very busy, and continuing in the traditions of Sir Winston Churchill. That is really all I've got for you today. As I said, it was a very quick canter through. I hope it may have not been the most intellectually stimulating, at least of some interest to some of you. And I'm going to leave you with a quick 60-second promotional video in case anyone wants to join the Queen's Royal Hussars. Fortunately for me, unfortunately for you, I don't have time for questions, but I would just like to say on behalf of myself and the delegation here today and the whole regiment, a massive thank you for your hospitality and ongoing support, and we hope that it's a relationship we can maintain in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Captain Nelson, for your presentation and for your service. Lawrence is here, and we promised earlier that there would be more opportunities to honor his remarkable service to ICS, and let me get started. There we go.
For 25 years, and he has always been an extraordinary friend and mentor. What are the qualities that set Lawrence apart? I'd like to highlight just 5. The first is his energy. I don't think Lawrence ever sleeps, or sleeps very much. He has the energy of people half his age. The second quality is his passion. Lawrence never does anything by half measures. If he commits to a project or to you, you're going to receive the full Lawrence. His passion inspires. The third quality is vision. Lawrence has that rare ability to see farther than others, to dream with his eyes open. We've all seen that during his leadership of the Churchill Society, with the most recent example being the unique partnership that he engineered with Russi. The fourth quality is integrity. Lawrence's word is his bond. He models the highest ethical and professional standards in everything he does. And the final quality is courage, which, as we know, Churchill prized above all else because all other qualities depend on it. Lawrence has the courage to tackle challenges that would deter mere mortals. In other words, Lawrence personifies, more than anyone else I know, the sterling qualities of Winston Churchill. He is the world's preeminent Churchillian today. Lawrence, I love you, and I thank you for all you've done. Now, I'd like to introduce a few of your friends who would also like to honor you today.
What has most impressed me about Lawrence is just simply his level of dynamism and activity. He really is someone who lives that Churchill dictum, action this day.
What impresses me about Lawrence Geller is that he has so many sides to his personality. He's incredibly bright, he's very helpful, but he's also willing to pitch in and get his hands dirty. And so it's been wonderful for us at Russi because he's really gotten into the weeds on our building project in the most extraordinary ways. At the same time, he provides a lot of good strategic macro advice. So he's a good all-arounder for us, and I'm sure it's the same for the Churchill Society.
Lawrence, I don't know where to begin. It's simply, I've got the Battle of Blenheim behind me, and Churchill's great ancestor, John Churchill, 1st Duke of Marlborough, never surrendered, never lost a battle, never did not take a fort that he laid siege to. And in your own way, Lawrence, you have been absolutely indomitable. Your strength, your energy, your zest, and my God, you've been up for the battle. You really have. You've kept us all awake at night. No, Lawrence, your spirit has been absolutely magnificent. You have held that flame alight for the last so many years, and you have made us relevant. You have made us think about how we should position ourselves for the future. And of course, we go back to the basics of what Great Aunt Mary told you, which is to keep the history green, i.e. accurate, correct, and to project Churchillian values. You have done that in absolute spades, Lawrence. And on behalf of all our family, I can't thank you enough for the last 20 years. You have secured a dramatic victory, and you leave us in great shape. Thank you.
From what I know of his work with the ICS, the most important thing, the most important legacy, is making the papers available, Churchill's papers, for the work of school children, because the knowledge of history is not as great as it should be in every succeeding generation. And facilitating that knowledge of one of the most important figures ever in our history is a very important legacy for anybody to leave.
And Lawrence has really put energy into the understanding of Churchill's life and his motivations and the lessons that we can take from that in the here and now. So I think the fact that the Churchill Society is still very vibrant, still energetic, it is still incredibly relevant, is because of a lot of people involved in it, but definitely because of the energy, that enthusiasm that Lawrence injects into every project that he sets his mind to. So that's, I think, why we should all be very, very grateful for the work that Lawrence has done, making sure the Churchill Society remains as relevant as ever.
He was a man who you could go to for action, information, advice, whatever. He wasn't just a nominal chairman like we'd had before. He really took part, and he still does. He doesn't interfere. Well, I don't think he does. You can tell me different. But he really has a very committed, active belief in what he does, and he puts his money where his mouth is in both senses. He's put a lot of money into it, of course, but he's given so much of his time. It's just incredible. And I doubt you'll find another organisation that has a chairman quite as committed and energetic as Lawrence. And really, to say energy and commitment, they're the two prime words I would always associate with Lawrence.
I think if I were blurbing Lawrence's autobiography, I would mention his passion for Churchill and all things Churchillian, of course, including his, he loved Churchill so much he married into the family. I think that his passion for these big enterprises, for putting people together, he really has got the most extraordinary capacity for getting people together. I mean, who else would have been able to have organised President Zelensky and Boris Johnson in the middle of the Ukraine war, for example? So that's the work that I would reach for if I was writing a blurb for the back of his book.
Well, I think it's imperative that having a historic beacon like Winston Churchill is very important as a North Star for young people today and the adults that they will be tomorrow. And I think Lawrence Geller, understanding that, is making a significant and has made a significant contribution.
I think he's taken the organization, expanded it, increased its quality, and leaving us in a very stable position with Rusi and with everyone ready, willing, and able to go forward. And I think that is an achievement in the sense that you judge any good CEO or leader by the way that he looks after his succession. And I think he's done that.
If not me, who? If not now, when? That's Lawrence. That's what summarizes him the best.
Probably 10 years ago, I managed to recruit my sister Jenny to come to Washington, D.C. to do the wonderful love letters between Lord Randolph and Jenny Jerome. And they were married to be engaged within 3 days. Well, in the 48 hours we were in Washington, Lawrence certainly made a big impression on my sister, and the rest now is history.
I think over the 5 decades now that I've known him, and 3 decades professionally as well, I think what's most impressive is how he inspires pretty much everybody he comes in contact with, from a high level to somebody who is just opening the door at a hotel for him, one of his porters. I've seen him sit at a dinner table over wine and inspire a painter to sculpt and paint. At the same time, he walks into the care homes and one of the nurses, is maybe having a little bit of an off day. And after speaking with him, she's on top of the world and ready to go forward. It's everything that he does to grow himself, but to really inspire and touch the lives and improve the lives of others around him. And I don't know anybody else that is as caring in every facet of their life about so many people on so many levels.
Lawrence, It is through your vision, hard work and determination that the International Churchill Society is where it is today. Your great friendship with Mary Soames led you to taking this on. With a huge amount of work, diplomacy and generosity, you have achieved and given so much for which our family are enormously grateful. You have returned Winston to the capital and ensured that he will forever have a home at the foot of the English steps in Freedom Foyer between George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. You negotiate an alliance with George Washington University so that the International Churchill Society has a permanent home in the United States. And more recently, you have been instrumental in bringing about the new collaboration with RUSI, which is very exciting and a great honor. The conferences that you have arranged have not only been fascinating, but also great fun. They are often in stunning locations. Many of us have enjoyed dinners and events at Blenheim Palace, the Capitol, the British Embassy in Washington, to name but a few. On one great occasion, His Royal Highness Prince Charles, now King Charles, was the speaker and told us all about his memories of meeting Winston. Now, here we are in Scotland, enjoying the Royal Yacht Britannia and dining at Edinburgh Castle. Thank you again, Lawrence. You invariably meet lots of friends as well as new members from all over the world coming together with a shared interest. They are always a wonderful opportunity to learn so much history and to debate current issues. Earlier this year, we unveiled the magnificent full-size statue of Winston painting by Paul Rafferty in the port of Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat. Again, this would not have happened without your hard work and determination. For 20 years as chairman, you have given so much to the International Churchill Society. Through your efforts and generosity, many lifelong friendships have been forged. Indeed, more than that. As you may all know, Lawrence and I got married last year in London. I wonder if we are the first marriage having met through ICS. Be careful who you sit next to at dinner. Those of you who know Lawrence will be aware he is always busy working on so many different projects, most recently creating the leading dementia care homes here in the UK. In truth, he never sits still. When it is time to relax, it is often down to me to make the reservations. Poor Lawrence, to his surprise and horror, he is often called Mr. Churchill. No escaping the family now. It is wonderful that this year my friend, Lawrence's daughter Tanya, has flown over from the United States to join us in celebrating her father's great achievements with ICS. On behalf of the Churchill family, I thank you, Lawrence, for the blood, toil, tears and sweat that you have given to the enduring memory of Winston Churchill. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Lawrence Geller.
I did say at the beginning of the day the tears would come. Anyway, thank you, Mitchell. That concludes our programme for today, our academic programme for today. And before I mention that awful word, buses, I have a few things just to conclude upon. Firstly, I would like all of us to thank our wonderful contributors today, Captain Hendricks, Andrew Liddell, Neil McLennan, Sonia Purnell, James Holland, Dame Marriott Leslie, Sir David Cannadine, and our team from the Hussars. Can you please thank all of our contributors? Now, these conferences don't just happen, as you know. We have a wonderful team behind the scenes. But more than that, it takes a great contribution from our wonderful sponsors. And I really would like all of us to thank the contributors, the sponsors for today's event. They're all listed in the back of the programme. We all know who they are. They know who they are. We rely heavily upon them, and we thank you all very, very much indeed. Now, not only do we have buses, we have the buses addendum. So we are running ever so slightly late. So what we have done is that all coaches for this evening will leave from the hotel, so the same place you boarded last night, at 6:15. So a little later than planned, so that we still have the same time to change. Now, coaches will be leaving from there to the respective destinations. That's Edinburgh Castle and to the museum. And the coaches will begin the return trips from 8:30, and the last one's around 9 o'clock. So that should allow time for people to go off after for supper or whatever their own plans are. So anyone who knows where the museum in Edinburgh Castle is, please sit at the front of the bus. It's the large building on the hill. And hopefully we'll see you there. So tonight should be a wonderful evening. Both venues are absolutely superb, and we continue this tradition of having the most wonderful venues. So those in the Admiralty package have the cocktail reception at the National Museum of Scotland, and that's held in the rooftops, which is one of the most prestigious settings in Edinburgh, and apparently it has fabulous views of the castle, because those of us in the castle won't see the castle. And then the others who are going to the castle, again, just please remember that the buses will go up onto the esplanade, but there is some cobbled paving in the way in, so please remember that when you're choosing this evening's footwear. So I hope you have a wonderful evening. We'll see you all at cocktails, and then we'll reconvene tomorrow. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful night.